It starts with a fall. A pregnant woman, 7 months along, lies bleeding on a marble staircase inside a Beverly Hills mansion. Her husband, a powerful millionaire, stands at the top, calm, watching, thinking he's just erased a problem. But what he doesn't know is that the woman he tried to destroy isn't just a victim. She's the rightful owner of his entire empire, and her survival will become his downfall. What follows is a war of lies, power, and revenge that turns the city upside down. Stay with me, because you won't believe how justice hits back at the man who thought he was untouchable. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The night in Beverly Hills was silent, wrapped in the kind of stillness that only wealth could afford. The marble staircase inside the Kane mansion gleamed like a frozen river under the cold light of a chandelier. Every reflection on its surface seemed too perfect, too polished, like the life Isabella Carter once thought she had. She was 7 months pregnant, her bare feet pressed against the smooth floor as she walked toward her husband's study, her heart beating faster with each step. The glow from Edward Kane's office spilled into the hallway. Papers were spread across his mahogany desk, a laptop still open. Isabella's eyes caught the number on the screen before he turned around. $2 million. A wire transfer to an unknown account. Her voice trembled. "Edward, what is this?" He looked up, his expression unreadable, his tone sharp. "What are you doing in here?" "I needed our tax records," she said. "The pediatrician asked for proof of insurance. I opened the wrong folder and found this transfer." He shut the laptop slowly, almost methodically. "You've been snooping." "I was looking for paperwork, not secrets." Isabella's breathing was uneven. $2 million disappeared. "I think I have the right to know where it went." "You don't have the right to question me," he replied, his voice like steel. "This is business." "Then tell me what kind of business hides from your own wife." Edward's eyes darkened. "You're imagining things again. Pregnancy hormones. You're becoming paranoid." "I am not paranoid," Isabella snapped, her voice rising for the first time in months. "I'm pregnant, not blind." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Edward stood, closing the distance between them. His cologne filled the air, the same scent from their wedding day, lavender and cedar. Once it had made her feel safe. Now it made her sick. He leaned closer. "You're exhausting me, Isabella. Always asking questions, always trying to control things you don't understand." "I just want honesty," she whispered. "Is that too much to ask?" His hand twitched, a small movement that looked almost nervous, but wasn't. It was rage trying to stay contained. "You should be careful with that tone," he said quietly. "People might start thinking you're ungrateful." "I'm not ungrateful," she said. "I just want to know the truth." Something snapped in his eyes, the calm giving way to fury. "The truth," he repeated, as if the word itself offended him. "You want the truth? The truth is you wouldn't survive a day without me." He stepped closer until she could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "You'd still be nothing if I hadn't saved you from your father's shadow." "My father never hurt me," Isabella said softly. "You did." That was it. The line that burned everything down. Edward's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. He turned toward the staircase, as if to walk away. Isabella followed, still pleading for an answer. "Please, Edward, I just need to know. Tell me where the money went. Please." He turned back fast, too fast. For a second, their eyes met. What she saw wasn't confusion or anger. It was calculation. He stepped toward her, his voice cold and deliberate. "You shouldn't have threatened me." Before she could move, his hands were on her shoulders. The world tilted. Marble rushed up to meet her. Her scream filled the hall, echoing off the walls as her body crashed against the steps. Pain exploded through her side. A sharp, suffocating heat bloomed inside her belly. The chandelier above blurred into streaks of white light. She tried to breathe but couldn't. Every gasp tore at her ribs. Her hand instinctively reached for her stomach. "Please," she whispered. "Please let the baby be okay." Blood spread beneath her, thin at first, then thicker, pooling along the white stone. The scent of it mixed with the lavender cleaner Maria had used that morning. The house smelled perfect, even when it wasn't. From above, Edward's shoes appeared on the top step. Expensive Italian leather, the ones she had picked up from the cobbler yesterday because he liked them resoled in a specific way. His voice drifted down, emotionless. "You shouldn't have threatened me, Isabella." Her fingers twitched. Her phone was still in her pocket. She tried to pull it out, her vision blurring. The screen lit up, glowing faintly. She unlocked it by instinct and hit the emergency icon. But before she could press again, he was kneeling beside her. His voice changed, now full of fake panic. "Oh my God, Isabella, can you hear me?" She couldn't answer. Her mouth filled with the metallic taste of blood. Edward grabbed his own phone and dialed. "Yes, I need an ambulance. My wife fell down the stairs. She's 7 months pregnant. Please hurry. We're at 1425 Hillcrest Drive, Beverly Hills." His voice was steady, too steady. While he spoke, his hand tightened on her shoulder. His lips moved close to her ear. "Tell them you fell," he whispered. "Do you hear me? You fell." Her eyelids fluttered. The world began to fade around the edges. The last thing she saw was the chandelier, swaying slightly above them. Sirens echoed faintly outside. Edward's hand never left her shoulder, his grip both protective and possessive. Anyone watching would think he was a terrified husband, desperate to save his wife and unborn child. The paramedics burst through the door minutes later. 2 of them, 1 male, 1 female. The woman knelt beside Isabella, brushing hair from her face. "Mrs. Kane, can you hear me?" Her voice trembled for a second. "It's me, Rebecca Torres." Through the fog of pain, Isabella recognized her college roommate, the one Edward had forbidden her to see years ago. Their eyes met, and Rebecca's expression hardened. She looked from Isabella to Edward, then back again. "What happened?" Edward answered quickly. "She fell. I heard her scream from my office. When I came out, she was already at the bottom." Rebecca didn't respond. She just looked at Isabella, her tone softer now. "Mrs. Kane, is that what happened?" Isabella wanted to speak. She wanted to say everything, to tell the truth, but her lips barely moved. The word came out as a whisper, almost soundless. "I fell." Rebecca's eyes filled with something that looked like grief. She nodded slowly, even though she didn't believe a single word. The paramedics lifted Isabella onto a stretcher. Each movement sent waves of agony through her ribs. The sirens outside grew louder. Edward followed closely behind as they wheeled her toward the ambulance, his hand still on her arm. To everyone else, it looked like love. To Isabella, it felt like a leash. And as the doors closed and the ambulance sped into the night, the marble staircase behind them gleamed again under the chandelier's cold light. Perfect, unstained, as if nothing had ever happened at all. Fluorescent light poured down from the ceiling of Los Angeles Memorial Hospital, bright and cold. The kind of light that made everything look cleaner than it felt. The steady rhythm of machines filled the room. A mechanical heartbeat that was not hers, but kept her alive. Isabella Carter lay motionless on the hospital bed, her skin pale against the white sheets. Her hands trembled over her swollen belly. Every breath burned. Dr. Ethan Brooks entered quietly, his clipboard pressed to his chest. His silver hair was damp, as if he had come straight from another emergency. He spoke softly. "Mrs. Kane, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. The room was a blur of white coats and shadows. "The baby," she whispered. Dr. Brooks nodded. "Your ribs are fractured, but you're stable. The baby's heartbeat is weak, but it's there. Your child is fighting, Isabella. You both are." She let out a fragile breath, a sound between relief and disbelief. Her right hand moved to her stomach again. A faint movement responded under her palm. Life. It was still there. "Do you remember what happened?" the doctor asked. Her lips parted. The truth hovered at the edge of her tongue, trembling, fragile, dangerous. But before she could speak, the door opened. Edward Kane stepped inside, dressed in a crisp white shirt. No tie, sleeves rolled just enough to look casual. He carried a bouquet of white lilies. The smell filled the room, too sweet, too strong. "Doctor," he said smoothly, "how is she?" Dr. Brooks studied him for a moment. "She's recovering. She needs rest." Edward's face arranged itself into an imitation of concern. "Thank God. I thought I lost her." He placed the flowers on the side table and moved closer, taking Isabella's hand. His touch felt like ice. "You scared me," he said softly. "You slipped, didn't you?" Isabella's mouth was dry. She could taste blood at the back of her throat. "I slipped," she repeated. "Doctor," Brooks watched them both. "Slipped?" he asked carefully. Edward nodded before she could answer again. "She was walking downstairs to get water. I heard a scream. When I found her, she was on the floor. I called 911 right away." The words sounded rehearsed, perfectly delivered. Dr. Brooks said nothing, only wrote something in his chart. Isabella could feel his doubt, quiet and heavy. A few minutes later, the nurse entered with a tray. Linda Parker, mid-40s, sharp eyes softened by years of experience. She adjusted Isabella's fore and smiled gently. "You're lucky, sweetheart. Another few minutes, and we might have lost you both." Edward straightened his back. "I made sure the ambulance came immediately," he said. Linda didn't look at him. She was watching Isabella instead. Her gaze lingered on the bruises along the woman's arm, the faint outline of fingers, the older marks on her wrist. She said nothing. She simply touched Isabella's shoulder lightly and whispered, "If you need anything, press the button. Anything at all." When she left, Edward sat down beside the bed. "You scared everyone," he said quietly. "You have to be more careful. You could have killed our baby." Her voice cracked. "I didn't fall on purpose." "I know," he said, stroking her hand. "But you need to stop stressing yourself. You know how fragile you are." "No?" He spoke the word fragile as if it were a diagnosis, not an insult. Isabella closed her eyes. She felt trapped between pain and obedience. The doctor returned later that night, long after Edward had gone home to get some rest. The sound of rain outside filled the silence. Dr. Brooks pulled a chair to her bedside. "Mrs. Kane," he began softly, "I reviewed your medical records. You've been treated 3 times in the past 2 years for accidents. 1 fall in your bathroom, 1 in a parking lot, 1 at a restaurant." She turned her head toward the wall. "I'm clumsy." His voice stayed calm. "You were a professional swimmer in college. You have excellent balance. What changed?" Her eyes filled with tears she refused to release. "Marriage," she whispered. Dr. Brooks exhaled slowly. "I see." He reached for a folder and placed it on her bedside table. "Inside are resources, hotlines, legal advocates. When you're ready—" "Oh?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. "No, you're surviving," he replied. "There's a difference." Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Isabella stared at the folder for a long time. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. Instead, she pressed her hand against her belly again. "We're okay," she whispered to the life inside her. "We'll be okay. Just stay with me." The monitor beside her beeped in slow rhythm, a lullaby of persistence. Hours later, the room darkened. The rain had stopped. Isabella was drifting in and out of sleep when a familiar voice broke through the haze. "Isabella." Her heart jolted. It wasn't Edward. It was softer, warmer. The nurse, Linda Parker. She had changed out of her scrubs, still holding a small notebook in her hand. "I shouldn't be here off shift," Linda said quietly, "but I've seen this before." She looked at the bruises again. "You don't have to pretend with me." Isabella's eyes welled up. "He didn't mean to. He was angry." "They always say that," Linda whispered, "until it gets worse." She hesitated. "I used to be like you. I stayed too long." The words hung in the air like smoke. Linda opened the notebook, tore a small page, and placed it under Isabella's phone. "If you ever need a place to go, that address is safe. I won't ask questions." "Thank you," Isabella said, barely audible. Linda smiled faintly. "Just rest. Your baby's strong. You have to be strong too." Ugh. After Linda left, Isabella turned her head toward the window. City lights shimmered through the rain. Somewhere out there, Edward was sleeping peacefully in their mansion, certain his story would hold. Her phone buzzed on the table, a message from him. "Love you, sleep well, you scared me." Another followed seconds later. "Don't tell anyone what happened tonight. It'll only make things worse." She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Her thumb hovered over delete, then stopped. Instead, she took a screenshot and saved it. Evidence. The baby moved again, gentle and stubborn. Isabella placed her hand over her belly, feeling the faint kick. "You're fighting," she whispered. "So will I." The door creaked open one last time before dawn. Dr. Brooks stepped in, checking the monitors. "The heartbeat's stronger," he said quietly. "Looks like your child's a fighter." Isabella smiled weakly. "Maybe it runs in the family." The doctor nodded, adjusting her IV. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." As the first light of morning filtered through the blinds, Isabella's eyes stayed open. The world outside was waking up. Inside the room, the machines continued their steady rhythm. The heartbeat on the monitor rose and fell like distant waves, proof that something fragile could still survive. For now, that was enough. Morning light spilled through the blinds of room 412, washing the sterile walls in a pale gold glow. The city outside was already alive, but inside, time moved differently. Machines beeped softly. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the air. Isabella Carter sat upright against the headboard, one hand resting on her swollen belly. She looked tired, almost translucent. Like a photograph left too long in the Sunday, Dr. Ethan Brooks entered with quiet footsteps. His expression was thoughtful, but there was something harder beneath it this time. He glanced at her chart before speaking. "You didn't sleep much." "I'm fine," Isabella said automatically. Ethan looked at her, not convinced. "I read your file again. 3 emergency visits in the last 2 years, all classified as accidental falls." Isabella's lips parted slightly. "I told you, I'm clumsy." He closed the folder and set it down. "No, you're not. You were an athlete. You swam competitively at Stanford. You have balance, discipline, control. None of this looks like clumsiness to me." Her throat tightened. "You think he did this? I think you already know he did." For a long time, the only sound was the rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor. Then Isabella whispered, "I can't prove it." Ethan hesitated before replying, "You shouldn't have to prove being afraid." He pulled a chair closer. "What I can tell you is this. The bruises on your shoulder and back, the pattern of the fractures, the way you fell, it all fits the same pattern. Intimate partner violence. You're not alone, Isabella. But you have to decide if you want help." She looked down at her hands. They were trembling again. "He said it was my fault. They always do." Her eyes filled, but she forced the tears back. "If I tell the truth, he'll destroy me." Ethan's voice softened. "He already tried. Before Isabella could respond, the door opened. Linda Parker entered, holding a tray of medication. Her eyes moved between them quickly, sensing the tension. "Everything all right in here?" Ethan nodded slightly. "We're fine. Just talking about recovery." Linda set the tray down, but she didn't leave. "I spoke with your nurse from last night," she said gently. "She told me the baby's stronger. That's good news." Isabella smiled faintly. "She's been kicking more." Linda's voice lowered. "You're lucky, honey. Some women don't make it after what you've been through." Those words sat heavy in the air. Isabella's gaze drifted to the window again. "I know." After Linda left, Ethan leaned forward. "Listen to me. You can walk out of here and pretend it was an accident, or you can start protecting yourself. I can call a social worker. She can explain your options." "I said I'm fine," Isabella repeated, her tone sharper this time. Ethan studied her. He saw the wall go up, the same wall he had seen in dozens of women before her. "All right," he said quietly, "but I'm leaving this folder here, just in case." He left it on the bedside table next to her phone. Then he stood and left. Isabella stared at the folder. The word resources was printed neatly on the cover. She didn't touch it. Instead, she opened her phone. Edward had texted again. "Morning, sweetheart. How are you feeling? I'll visit soon. Remember, the doctor knows nothing. Don't ruin this for us." She turned the phone face down. Outside, she could hear voices in the hallway, a nurse's laugh, the squeak of shoes, life moving on. For a moment, she wanted to get up, walk out, disappear. But her ribs ached when she tried to move, forcing her back into the bed. She pressed her hand to her stomach again. The baby kicked faintly, as if reminding her to stay still. That evening, the hospital quieted. The machines beeped in their steady rhythm. The sound was comforting and suffocating at once. Isabella couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the sound of Edward's voice on the stairs. "You shouldn't have threatened me." A knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up. A hospital staff member stood in the doorway, holding an envelope. "This was left at the nurse's station for you, Mrs. Kane. No name." Isabella frowned. "Who left it?" "She didn't say. Just asked that it be delivered to you directly." "Okay." The woman left before Isabella could ask more. The envelope was plain, unmarked, sealed with tape. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a small USB drive and a note written in quick, hurried handwriting. You deserve to know what he's hiding. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, L.S. The initials hit her like a jolt. Lauren Shaw, Edward's assistant. She had worked with him for 5 years, quiet and precise, always loyal to him. At least that's what Isabella thought. Her pulse quickened. She didn't have a laptop, but she could guess what this was. Proof. Evidence. Something Edward didn't want her to see. She pressed her hands over her belly, whispering to herself, "This is it. This is how it starts." The next morning, Dr. Brooks returned with a faint smile. "The baby's heartbeat is stronger. You're healing faster than expected." Isabella nodded. "Can I be discharged soon?" "Tomorrow, if your vitals remain stable." He paused. "Will you have someone with you?" "My husband," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No, my brother. David is flying in from New York." Ethan nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Good. You shouldn't be alone right now." After he left, Isabella's phone buzzed again. Another message from Edward. "I'll pick you up tomorrow. Wear something nice. Reporters might be outside. We have to look united." Her chest tightened. He was already preparing the performance. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made her flinch. When she closed her eyes, she saw the stairs, the marble, the flash of his shoes at the top. Over and over, the moment replayed. And every time, she wondered if anyone would ever believe her. At 2 a.m., she sat up, turned on the lamp, and looked at the envelope again. She touched her stomach. "If I can't do this for me, I'll do it for you," she whispered. "You didn't choose this world, but I'll make it safe for you." The baby shifted under her hand, as if in answer. She picked up her phone, searched for the name printed on the folder Ethan had left. Domestic Violence Legal Aid Network. The number glowed on the screen. She didn't press call. Not yet, but she saved it. Outside, the rain started again, light and distant. It tapped against the glass in slow rhythm. Isabella closed her eyes, listening. For the first time since the fall, her heartbeat matched the baby's on the monitor. 2 rhythms, faint but alive. Tomorrow she would leave this room. Tomorrow everything would change. The morning sun over Los Angeles had never felt so harsh. Isabella Carter stepped out of the hospital lobby wearing dark glasses and a beige coat that barely covered the bruises along her arms. Her brother, David Carter, had arrived that morning from New York. He insisted on being there, but Isabella told him she needed to do one thing alone. She had an appointment. Her taxi stopped outside a brick building downtown. The sign read, "Chen and Associates." The lobby smelled of paper and coffee. Everything was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers. Isabella took a deep breath before entering the glass office at the end of the hall. Behind the desk sat Sarah Chen, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features and calm eyes. Her hair was tied neatly, her suit dark blue. When she looked up, she didn't smile, but her expression carried something stronger than kindness. It was recognition. "Mrs. Kane," Sarah said, "please, sit down." "No." Isabella hesitated before taking the seat across from her. The chair felt solid, grounding. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Sarah waited patiently. "You don't have to rush. Just tell me what happened." Isabella's hands trembled as she opened her purse. She pulled out the small USB drive and placed it on the desk. "This was left for me at the hospital. I think it's proof." Sarah looked at it, then at her. "Proof of what?" "My husband," Isabella whispered. "Edward Kane. He pushed me down the stairs." Sarah's pen froze above her notepad. "You're 7 months pregnant, correct?" "Yes." "And he claims it was an accident." Isabella nodded slowly. "He told everyone I slipped. He made me say it too. I was afraid. He said no one would believe me." Sarah leaned back, studying her. "Do you still believe that?" There was a long pause before Isabella answered, "I want to stop believing it." The lawyer nodded once. "Good. Because this is not just about what he did to you, it's about what he could do next. Men like your husband, men with money and power, they don't stop when you survive, they stop when you fight back." Sarah opened a drawer and pulled out a legal pad. "We'll start with a restraining order. I'll request an emergency protection order from the judge today, then we'll file for separation. You'll need a place to stay where he can't reach you." "I can stay with my brother," Isabella said quietly. "He's in town." "Good," Sarah replied. "You'll need witnesses, medical reports, and documentation of every injury. I'll contact Dr. Brooks and Nurse Parker. They've already seen enough to help us." Isabella took a shaky breath. "He'll be furious." Sarah looked straight at her. "He already is. You just haven't seen what fury looks like when it's losing control." For the next hour, Isabella recounted everything. The transfers, the arguments, the bruises, the fear. Sarah took notes quickly, her handwriting sharp and precise. When Isabella reached the part about the $2 million, Sarah's pen stopped. "You said you found a transfer?" she repeated. "Yes. $2 million to an account I didn't recognize." "Did you take a photo?" "Yes, it's on my phone." Sarah's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That could be important. Financial secrets usually hide the real story. When Isabella finished, she was exhausted. Her voice had gone hoarse from speaking, her chest tight from holding back tears. Sarah handed her a glass of water. "You did well," she said softly. "You just did something most victims never get the chance to do. You told the truth." Isabella looked down. "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never does at first," Sarah said. "But you'll see. The truth has a way of growing once it's spoken." The lawyer stood and walked to a cabinet filled with folders. She pulled out one marked "Protective Order." "This will be the first step. It gives you legal distance. If he comes near you, he'll be arrested. You need that protection before we start the next phase." "What's the next phase?" "Taking back everything he stole from you. Your safety, your finances, your voice." Isabella's lips trembled. "You think I can win?" Sarah's tone was calm. "I think you already started." Outside, traffic buzzed faintly through the glass walls. The world kept moving as if nothing extraordinary was happening. But inside that office, something shifted. Isabella Carter, for the first time in years, was no longer silent. Sarah looked down at the USB. "I'll have this examined by a forensic technician. If it contains recordings, we'll use them in court. But remember, once we start this process, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," Isabella said. "I want to end it." Sarah gave a small, approving nod. "Then let's begin." "Law." She slid a few documents across the desk. "Sign here. It allows me to represent you and gives permission to access your medical files. I'll file the paperwork within the hour." Isabella took the pen. Her hand shook as she wrote her name. The signature looked unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone stronger. When she finished, Sarah leaned forward, her voice lower now. "One more thing. If he contacts you, save everything. Texts, emails, calls. Don't delete anything. Every lie he tells can become your evidence." "I understand." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good. You're not just his victim anymore, Isabella. You're his case." As Isabella stood to leave, Sarah handed her a business card. "If you ever feel unsafe, call me, day or night." Outside, the sun had dipped lower, painting the city in shades of amber and gray. Isabella walked down the sidewalk, the noise of cars and voices rising around her. For the first time in weeks, she felt the air move through her lungs without pain. When she reached the crosswalk, her phone buzzed. A message from Edward. "I heard you're meeting people. Be careful what stories you tell. I can make problems disappear." She didn't reply. Instead, she took a screenshot and saved it next to the hospital photos. Another piece of evidence. Another step forward. That night, David met her at the hotel Sarah had arranged for her. He wanted answers, but one look at his sister's face silenced him. She didn't need to explain. "Did you find someone who can help?" he asked finally. "Yes," she said. "Her name is Sarah Chen." David's jaw tightened. "Good, because I'm not letting him get away with this." Isabella looked at her brother, the weight of exhaustion still on her face. "Neither am I." She touched her belly. The baby moved under her hand, a small reminder of life still fighting inside her. For the first time, she didn't whisper apologies to the child. She whispered a promise. "We're going to be free." The courthouse in downtown Los Angeles stood like a slab of stone against the morning Sunday. Cameras already lined the steps, reporters whispered, adjusting their microphones. The story of a billionaire investor accused of pushing his pregnant wife had begun to circulate. Isabella Carter stepped out of the black car that David sent, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She looked fragile, but there was steel in her eyes. Inside, the courtroom was cold. The polished wood, the echo of heels, the sterile silence before the storm. Sarah Chen stood beside her, arranging files on the table. "Remember," Sarah said softly, Today is not the full trial. It's just the protective order hearing. But how we start matters. Isabella nodded. Her hand brushed her belly, feeling the faint rhythm inside. The baby's heartbeat had steadied over the past week, a small defiance against everything Edward had done. Then the door opened. Edward Kane walked in wearing a navy suit and a smirk that didn't belong in a courtroom. His team of lawyers followed, led by a man with gray temples and a gold watch. Edward glanced around as if the entire proceeding were beneath him. When his eyes met Isabella's, the smile faded for just a second. Then he looked away. Judge Reynolds entered, a woman in her 60s with an expression that allowed no nonsense. "We're here to review the petition for a temporary restraining order," she said. Mrs. Kane, represented by attorney Sarah Chen. Mr. Kane, represented by Mr. Lowell. Lowell rose. "Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman. This entire situation stems from a misunderstanding. Mrs. Kane fell, unfortunately, during a domestic dispute. There's no evidence of intent." Sarah stood calmly. "Your Honor, the hospital records show 3 fractured ribs, a concussion, and a pattern consistent with repeated trauma. My client has filed police reports, and we have submitted text messages containing veiled threats." Judge Reynolds looked over the documents. "I've reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Kane, do you wish to speak?" Isabella stood slowly. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I'm 7 months pregnant. I was pushed down a staircase in my home. He told me to lie to the paramedics. He told me to say, 'I fell.' I've lived in fear for years. I just want to feel safe for me and my child." Edward's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, she's clearly emotional and exaggerating due to her condition." The judge's eyes flashed. "You'll let her finish." Isabella's gaze shifted toward Edward. "I loved him. I believed everything he said. But love isn't supposed to hurt like this. I'm not exaggerating. I'm surviving." Silence filled the room. Even the clicking of reporters' cameras outside seemed to fade. The judge took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "Temporary restraining order granted. Mr. Kane, you are prohibited from contacting your wife in any form, directly or indirectly, and must remain 500 feet away at all times. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand?" Edward's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." But the fire in his eyes said something else. As they exited the courtroom, cameras flashed. Sarah shielded Isabella from the crowd while security cleared a path. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. "Mrs. Kane, is it true your husband tried to kill you? Do you fear for your life?" Isabella kept her head down, but Sarah answered sharply, "No comments at this time." Outside the courthouse, the glare of the midday sun was blinding. Across the street, a black SUV waited. David Carter stood beside it, his expression unreadable behind dark sunglasses. When Isabella saw him, her breath caught. She hadn't seen her brother in months. He opened the door for her, his voice low. "You shouldn't have been alone in there." "I wasn't," she said. "Sarah was with me. I meant before." They sat inside the car. For a few moments, there was silence. The air between them was heavy with unspoken things. Finally, David spoke again. "I read everything in the reports. He pushed you, while you're pregnant." His jaw tightened. "If it were up to me, he'd already be in prison." Isabella looked out the window. "It's not up to you. It's up to the law now." David exhaled, leaning back. "Then we'll use the law, and the media. You know I own a network. I can make sure the world sees him for what he is." "I don't want a scandal," she whispered. "It's not a scandal if it's the truth," he replied. "You need protection, and exposure might be the only thing that keeps him from trying again." Her phone buzzed. Another message from Edward. "You think a piece of paper will stop me?" She turned the screen toward David. His expression hardened instantly. "Send that to Sarah. I'll forward it to every journalist I know." "Please," Isabella said quietly. "I don't want this to turn into a war." David's voice softened. "It already is one, Izzy. You just finally have an army." That night, Sarah called to confirm the restraining order was officially registered. "You're protected for now," she said. "But be careful. He'll test the limits." "I know him," Isabella replied. "He'll never accept defeat quietly." Sarah's tone was firm. "Then we'll be louder." Later that evening, Isabella stood by the hotel window, watching the city lights flicker. Below, traffic moved endlessly. Life continued, indifferent to her pain. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, thinner, older. David knocked on her door, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You should rest," he said. "You need to keep your strength for what's next." "What's next?" "Public opinion," he said simply. "We'll make sure his reputation collapses before the trial even begins." She smiled faintly. "You sound like Dad." "Good," David said, "because Dad taught us that power means nothing if you don't use it to protect family." Isabella took the tea. The warmth felt grounding. "Thank you for coming." He looked at her belly, his voice softening. "How's the baby?" "Strong," she said. "The doctor said she's fighting." David smiled faintly. "Then she's a Carter." "Lau." They stood in silence, watching the skyline together. Down in the distance, flashing lights marked another news van arriving near the courthouse. The story was spreading. Across the city, in his mansion, Edward Kane sat in his darkened office, surrounded by empty glasses and shredded papers. On his computer screen, the headline glared back at him. "Millionaire under investigation, after alleged assault on pregnant wife." He slammed his fist against the desk, his voice breaking through the silence. "You think you can destroy me, Isabella? You'll see what power really looks like." But somewhere in a quiet hotel room, Isabella placed her hand over her heart, feeling the faint kick beneath her ribs. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid. The war had started, but she was no longer the one running. The morning after the restraining order hearing, Los Angeles felt different. The air outside the hotel was cool and sharp, the kind that made every sound travel farther. Isabella Carter stood by the window, looking at the city below. She had not slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Edward's face in the courtroom, that mix of arrogance and fury. But today she was not thinking about fear, she was thinking about answers. Her phone rang. Sarah Chen's voice came through, calm but urgent. "I need you in my office as soon as possible. Bring David with you." An hour later, the siblings sat across from Sarah in a conference room surrounded by case files. The lawyer slid a folder across the table. "We started investigating your husband's finances. David gave us access to a few of his business contacts. What we found is unusual." David leaned forward. "How unusual?" Sarah opened the folder. Pages of financial statements, wire transfers, and legal filings spilled out. Every company Edward controls was seeded by a single account. That account originated from a trust under the name of your late father, Robert Carter. Isabella froze. "That's impossible. My father's estate was managed through the family firm in New York. Edward said everything was already settled years ago." Sarah nodded. "That's what your husband wanted you to believe. But Robert Carter created something called the Carter Family Protection Trust. It is an irrevocable trust, meaning it cannot be changed or dissolved. It contains a specific clause. Any venture or company that uses funds from the trust automatically assigns controlling ownership to you, Isabella." David sat back slowly, processing the words. "Are you saying my sister owns everything he built?" Sarah's expression was steady. "Legally, yes. You hold 68% of Kane Capital's shares. Edward has 19. The rest belongs to minor investors. He has been using your inheritance to build his empire without realizing the trust transferred control to you from the moment he withdrew the first dollar." Isabella's breath caught. Her voice was small. "He used my money to destroy me." David's tone turned cold. "He used Dad's money. The same money Dad meant to protect you with." Sarah continued. "Your father anticipated that you might one day meet someone like Edward. That's why he built those protections." The trust documents were filed privately with the state and shielded by attorney-client confidentiality. Edward would never have seen them unless he specifically looked. Isabella's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. She saw signatures, dates, and financial records that traced back 6 years, all during her marriage. "How did he hide this from me?" "He didn't hide it," Sarah said gently. "You gave him power of attorney after the wedding. He simply managed everything without explanation. You trusted him." Tears gathered in Isabella's eyes. "I thought partnership meant sharing." David reached across the table and took her hand. "Partnership doesn't mean surrender. He took advantage of your love." Sarah nodded. "But that ends now. With this documentation, we can not only secure your financial safety but also expose his fraud. If he used your trust money for personal gain without disclosure, It is both civil and criminal liability. What happens if we reveal this in court? Isabella asked. Sarah's tone was calm but firm. It changes everything. His defense collapses. His image as a self-made millionaire disappears. He becomes a man who built his fortune on his wife's inheritance. And worse, he tried to kill her to keep control of it. Isabella stared at the documents. Her reflection shone faintly in the glossy paper. He'll never forgive this. He doesn't need forgiveness, David said. He needs accountability. They spent the next 2 hours organizing copies of the trust and cross-referencing them with Edward's business filings. Sarah's paralegal brought in coffee and a laptop, projecting graphs of transactions onto the wall. The pattern was unmistakable. Every major investment Edward made traced back to the same origin, the Carter family trust. At one point, Sarah paused and looked at Isabella. You realize what this means for you personally. Once this becomes public, you won't just be his victim. You'll be one of the wealthiest women in California. I don't care about that, Isabella said quietly. I just want my life back. David smiled faintly. You're about to have both. That afternoon, Sarah arranged a private meeting with Thomas Reed, the estate attorney who had managed the original trust. His hair was gray now, his eyes kind but sharp. He confirmed every detail. Your father's intent was clear. He wanted to ensure that no man could ever take your power away. The documents are airtight. They were designed to activate automatically. No court approval needed. Isabella's eyes filled again. He thought that far ahead. He loved you deeply, Reed said. He knew the world could be cruel, even to strong women. He wanted to make sure you would never have to depend on anyone to protect you. When the meeting ended, Isabella stood by the elevator in silence. David placed a hand on her shoulder. You okay? She nodded. It feels like I'm reading a story about someone else. That someone else is you, he said. You just forgot for a while. Later that evening, they returned to the hotel. The city outside glittered against the dusk. Isabella sat on the bed. The trust documents spread around her like pieces of a puzzle she had finally solved. She ran her fingers over her father's signature. He saved me even after he was gone. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number appeared. You think the law can protect you, Isabella? You'll regret what you've started. Her stomach tightened. She saved the message and sent a screenshot to Sarah. The reply came instantly. Keep every message. He's building our case for us. She looked at David. He's still trying to scare me. David's voice was calm but lethal. Let him try. Every threat digs his grave deeper. She turned her attention back to the papers. One line caught her eye, written in her father's handwriting. To my daughter, remember that your worth cannot be taken, only forgotten. The words hit her harder than any bruise ever had. She whispered them aloud. Only forgotten. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered, bright and unrelenting. For the first time since the fall, Isabella didn't feel small. She felt the ground return beneath her feet. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing. Tomorrow, Sarah would begin drafting the filings that would expose Edward's empire for what it really was. Tomorrow, the world would learn that the man who claimed to own everything had built his kingdom on stolen ground. And this time, Isabella would be the one standing at the top of the stairs. The courthouse was surrounded by reporters before sunrise. Vans lined the street. Cameras faced the marble steps. The name Edward Kane was on every screen. The story had exploded. The millionaire investor accused of pushing his pregnant wife down the stairs was finally going to face his first full hearing. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Officers stood near the walls, journalists whispered in the back rows, and flashes of cameras burst through the glass doors every time someone important entered. Isabella Carter sat beside Sarah Chen at the plaintiff's table. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. She wore a navy dress and a calm expression that hid her exhaustion. David Carter sat directly behind her, silent but steady, his presence like armor. His influence had already changed the tone of the trial. The media now spoke of Isabella not as a victim, but as a survivor. The Carter family had arrived in force, and Los Angeles was watching. Edward Kane entered last. He walked in surrounded by lawyers, his tailored gray suit sharp, his expression carefully composed, but behind his calm smile was something new. Desperation. The empire he once ruled was starting to fracture. Across the courtroom, reporters took notes as whispers spread. That's him. He looks smaller in person. That's the wife. She's the heiress to the Carter Trust. Judge Reynolds called for order. Court is now in session. This hearing will determine the charges and admissibility of new evidence presented by the plaintiff. Sarah Chen stood first. Your Honor, we are prepared to demonstrate that Mr. Kane's fortune was built entirely on assets belonging to Mrs. Carter through the Carter Family Protection Trust. Furthermore, we will show intent to commit fraud and attempted homicide. Lay. Edward's lead attorney, Charles Lowell, rose from the defense table. Your Honor, my client is being vilified in the press. The allegations are exaggerated and fueled by a media campaign orchestrated by the Carter family. We request dismissal of the financial fraud component as irrelevant to the assault charge. Judge Reynolds glanced over her glasses. You may argue relevance after the evidence is presented. Proceed, Miss Chen. Yen pros. Sarah moved toward the center of the courtroom, every step deliberate. The defense would like to believe these crimes exist separately, but they are connected by motive. Mr. Kane's wealth is built on deception. He used my client's inheritance to create his empire, and when she discovered the truth, he attempted to silence her permanently. She gestured to the screen where her paralegal displayed the financial charts uncovered in Part 6. Colored lines connected accounts, transfers, and shell companies. Every dollar he used came from a trust created by Robert Carter, her late father. The documents are notarized, dated, and verified by multiple institutions. Edward's lawyer objected. This is irrelevant to physical assault. Overruled, said the judge. Sarah continued. The night he pushed her, she had just confronted him about a missing $2 million. The transfer was to a personal offshore account. The motive is clear. He feared exposure, and he chose violence to maintain control. Isabella sat still, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Hearing it said aloud, hearing her pain turned into evidence, felt surreal. Lowell rose again. Your Honor, my client categorically denies these allegations. Mrs. Kane has a documented history of emotional distress during pregnancy. Her perception of events cannot be considered reliable. David clenched his fists behind her, but Sarah didn't flinch. We anticipated that argument, she said, which is why we have independent witnesses. She called the first witness, Dr. Ethan Brooks. The doctor took the stand, his calm professionalism commanding attention. I treated Mrs. Kane after the incident. Her injuries were not consistent with a slip or fall. The bruising patterns and the direction of the fractures suggest force applied from behind. Did she ever tell you what happened? Sarah asked. She told me she was afraid of her husband. Lowell objected again. Hearsay, the judge overruled. The statement pertains to her medical condition. Continue. Sarah nodded to Ethan. Doctor, what about the baby? The fetus showed distress initially, but the heartbeat stabilized. It was a miracle. They both survived. Reporters scribbled furiously. The word miracle echoed through the room. Next came Nurse Linda Parker. She confirmed the bruises and described Edward's behavior at the hospital. He was too calm. Most husbands panic when their wife is bleeding on a stretcher. He rehearsed every word before speaking. Lowell attempted to discredit her, but the nurse's composure never cracked. I've worked in trauma for 20 years, she said firmly. I know fear when I see it, and I know guilt when I see it. When she stepped down, Sarah returned to the table, glancing briefly at Isabella. You're doing great, she whispered. Then came the twist. Edward's own former assistant, Lauren Shaw, was called. The same woman who had sent the anonymous USB. She walked to the stand, avoiding Edward's gaze. Her voice was low but steady. He asked me to delete records of wire transfers. He said if Mrs. Kane ever learned where the money came from, everything would collapse. Sarah played the recording from the USB. Edward's voice filled the room. If she tries to leave, I'll bury her under contracts and lawyers. She'll be nothing. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Edward's face turned white. He tried to speak, but his attorney placed a hand on his arm. Judge Reynolds' gavel hit the bench. Order. Sarah's closing words were calm but sharp. Money built this house of lies. Control kept it standing, but truth tears it down. My client's life was nearly taken because she asked one question. Where did the money go? Now the world knows the answer. The judge declared a recess until the next day. Reporters surged forward as Edward was escorted out by security. Cameras flashed, capturing his glare, his clenched jaw. Outside, the courthouse steps turned into a battlefield of microphones. Sarah guided Isabella through the crowd while David blocked reporters. "Mrs. Kane, is it true your husband used your inheritance?" one shouted. "Do you believe he tried to kill you?" another asked. Isabella didn't stop walking. "The court will tell the truth," she said softly. That night, news networks aired clips of the hearing. Headlines ran across every channel. Millionaire's empire exposed. Pregnant heiress faces her abuser in court. The fall of Edward Kane. In his mansion, Edward watched in silence. He hurled a glass at the screen. "They think they can humiliate me," he muttered. "We'll see how long the press loves her when I show them who she really is." He picked up his phone and called his publicist. "Release the statement. Say she's unstable. Say she's after money. I want every outlet printing it by morning." As dawn broke, Isabella woke to dozens of notifications. Headlines twisted the story, painting her as manipulative, emotionally unstable, unfit to testify. David burst into her hotel suite, holding his phone. "He's buying the press." Isabella took a deep breath. "Then we'll buy the truth." Sarah arrived moments later. "Let him smear you," she said, "because the more he talks, the deeper he sinks." Isabella looked out the window, the sunrise burning through the clouds. "Then let him speak," she said quietly. "I have nothing left to hide." The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by chaos. Protesters, reporters, and curious spectators filled the plaza, waving signs and shouting questions. Half of them demanded justice for Isabella Carter. The other half, influenced by Edward's new media campaign, shouted that she was a liar. Inside the courthouse, Sarah Chen's team moved with quiet precision. Every file, every video, every witness statement was ready. Isabella sat at the plaintiff's table in a simple black dress, her hands folded neatly, her face calm. The noise outside was deafening, but inside her mind, there was only silence. David Carter entered and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "No matter what happens, remember who you are," he said softly. "You're a Carter. He's just a man pretending to be a god." The courtroom doors opened. Edward Kane walked in flanked by his lawyers. Cameras clicked. He wore a dark suit, polished shoes, and a look of defiance. For weeks he had been on every talk show, denying everything. His publicist had painted Isabella as unstable, greedy, and manipulative. The headlines now called her the heiress who cried wolf. Sarah leaned toward Isabella. "This ends today." Judge Reynolds entered, bringing immediate silence. "We're reconvening to review new evidence presented by the plaintiff," she said. Sarah rose, her tone firm. "Your Honor, yesterday the defense attempted to discredit my client by manipulating public perception. Today we will show this court not opinions, but facts." Edward's attorney smirked. "We'll see about that." Sarah turned to the clerk. "Please play Exhibit 47. The lights dimmed slightly as a video appeared on the courtroom screen. It was footage from a security camera inside the Kane mansion. The timestamp matched the night of the fall. The first few seconds showed the marble staircase, empty and silent. Then Isabella appeared, visibly pregnant, walking carefully down the hall. Edward followed, his posture tense. Their voices were faint but clear. $2 million, Edward," she said. "Where did it go?" "Stop asking questions," he snapped. "I have a right to know." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "You don't have rights without me." Then the moment came. He pushed her. The camera caught everything. The gasp, the fall, the flash of motion as she disappeared from frame. Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically. Edward's attorney shot to his feet. "This video is illegally obtained!" Sarah was ready. The recording was submitted by a third-party contractor hired by Kane Capital for security purposes. The file was stored in the company's cloud, which is owned by my client as the majority shareholder. Legally, it belongs to her. The judge nodded slowly. "Admissible." Edward's face turned white. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The courtroom erupted again as Sarah pressed on. "This video shows intent. It shows violence. And it shows motive." He pushed her after she confronted him about the missing money traced back to her inheritance. She turned to Edward. "Would you like to explain that to the court?" Edward's lawyer whispered frantically, but Edward stood anyway. His composure cracked. "That video doesn't tell the whole story." She was hysterical. She attacked me first. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Is that what we're calling gravity now, Mr. Kane? Laughter rippled through the gallery. Judge Reynolds banged the gavel. Order. Sarah walked toward the jury box. For weeks, the defense has spent millions to create a false narrative. They called her unstable. They said she fell, but now the truth speaks for itself. Money and power cannot erase evidence, and no publicist can rewrite reality. No, she motioned to the technician. Next, Exhibit 48. The USB audio played next. Edward's voice filled the courtroom again. If she leaves me, I'll bury her under contracts and lawyers. She'll be nothing. When it ended, there was only silence. Even Edward's attorneys had nothing to say. Sarah turned to the judge. My client is not seeking revenge. She is seeking protection, justice, and truth. The man who pretended to love her built his empire on her father's legacy, and when she uncovered it, he tried to take her life. The court deserves to see the full picture of who Edward Kane really is. The judge nodded. The court will recess to review all evidence. As soon as the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted into chaos again. Reporters rushed toward the doors. David stood beside Isabella, shielding her from the flash of cameras. Across the aisle, Edward sat frozen. The confidence that had carried him for years was gone. He looked smaller, older. The empire he had built on deceit was crumbling in front of him. When they left the courthouse, the crowd outside was no longer divided. The chants had changed. Justice for Isabella. Protect survivors. Kane must pay. Isabella paused on the courthouse steps, feeling the noise wash over her. For the first time, the noise wasn't directed at her. It was directed for her. David turned to her. He's finished. She shook her head softly. Not yet. But he's finally falling. Lump. That night, the world watched. Every news channel aired the video. Headlines exploded across the internet. The push on camera. Edward Kane, exposed. The fall of a millionaire. Inside his mansion, Edward threw his phone across the room. The screen shattered against the wall. The house that had once felt like a fortress now felt like a prison. His mother, Victoria Kane, called from New York. What have you done, Edward? I can fix this, he said through gritted teeth. No, she replied coldly. You've destroyed everything. He sat alone in the dark, the weight of silence pressing down. The power he once held had evaporated overnight. His lawyers stopped answering calls. Sponsors pulled out of contracts. The stock value of Kane Capital plunged 20% in a single day. Meanwhile, Isabella stayed at a safe house arranged by Sarah and David. She watched the coverage quietly, her hands resting over her belly. The baby moved gently beneath her palm. Sarah walked in carrying a folder. It's official. The district attorney will press criminal charges for attempted murder. The video sealed it. Isabella closed her eyes. It's over. Sarah smiled softly. Almost. David joined them, leaning against the doorway. You know what the reporters are calling this? What? Isabella asked. The marble justice, he said with a grin. The staircase that took you down is the one that brought him down. She smiled faintly. For the first time, the words didn't hurt. As the night deepened, Isabella looked at the skyline. The city lights shimmered against the darkness, endless and alive. Somewhere inside her, peace began to return. Edward Kane's empire had fallen, and tomorrow the court would give him what he truly deserved. The day of sentencing arrived under a gray Los Angeles sky. A soft drizzle fell over the courthouse, muting the noise of the city. The marble steps glistened with rain. For once, there were no reporters shouting questions, no flashing cameras. The verdict had already captured the world's attention. Today was only about justice. Inside, the courtroom was solemn and still. The air carried the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had been lost. Isabella Carter sat quietly beside Sarah Chen, her hands resting on her swollen belly. She was due in just 3 weeks, but she refused to miss this moment. David Carter sat behind her, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Edward Kane entered in handcuffs. The tailored suits were gone. He wore a plain orange jumpsuit, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow. The arrogance that once defined him had vanished. He looked smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves had closed in around him. Judge Reynolds entered, her black robe moving like a shadow across the bench. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at the file in front of her. The room fell silent. "The state of California versus Edward Kane," she began. "Charges include attempted murder, aggravated assault of a pregnant woman, and financial fraud. The court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and witness statements." "No." She paused, her gaze settling on Edward. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Edward stood slowly. His hands trembled as he gripped the table. "Your Honor," he began, "I made mistakes. I lost control. But I never meant to hurt her. I loved my wife. I loved our family. What happened that night was an accident." Sarah rose immediately. "Your Honor, may I respond?" Judge Reynolds nodded. "Love is not what we saw in that video," Sarah said firmly. "Love does not shove a woman down a marble staircase. Love does not use money and lies to erase the truth. What happened that night was not an accident. It was a choice. And if Isabella and her child had not survived, we would be standing here for a murder trial." The words hung in the air. Edward's head lowered, his jaw clenched. The judge turned to Isabella. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to address the court?" Isabella stood carefully, supported by Sarah. She looked pale but steady. Her voice was soft, but every word carried. "For years I thought silence was safety. I believed that if I stayed quiet, the pain would stop. But silence only gave him more power. He hurt me, and he hurt our child. I have scars that will never fade. But I'm still here. My baby is still here. And I want him to know that he didn't win." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. "I forgive him, not because he deserves it, but because I refuse to let hate be the only thing that survives this." No. When she sat down, the room was utterly silent. Even Edward looked shaken. Judge Reynolds cleared her throat and began to read. "Edward Kane, this court finds you guilty on all counts. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 20. Edward's face went white. His body sagged as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. The judge continued. "You used your wife's inheritance to build your fortune. You used her love to mask your control. And you used your power to inflict pain. This court will ensure that your power ends here." The gavel struck once. "Sentence is final." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras were forbidden inside, but the story would spread faster than any photograph. The once untouchable millionaire was now a convicted criminal. Edward turned toward Isabella as guards moved to take him away. His voice cracked. "You ruined me." She met his eyes calmly. "No, you ruined yourself." The officers led him through the side door, his chains rattling softly. For a moment, Isabella watched him disappear from view. Then she let out a long, quiet breath. The nightmare was finally over. Sarah touched her shoulder gently. "You did it." David leaned forward, his voice low. "It's done, Izzy. He'll never hurt you again." Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds broke apart, letting sunlight spill across the steps of the courthouse. Reporters stood at a distance, whispering into microphones, careful not to intrude. Sarah faced them briefly, her tone professional but firm. "Justice has spoken. The truth won." Later that evening, Isabella returned to her hotel. She stood before the mirror, removing the hospital wristband she still wore from weeks earlier. Her reflection looked stronger now. The bruises had faded, replaced by quiet determination. She turned as David entered the room. "You should rest," he said softly. "You've been through too much." "I will," she replied, "but not yet." He hesitated. "You going to the hospital tomorrow?" "Yes. Dr. Brooks said the baby's heartbeat is strong. He called her a fighter." David smiled faintly. "Then she's definitely a Carter." That night, Isabella sat by the window, watching the lights of Los Angeles flicker. She thought of her father's trust, of the protections he had built long before she needed them. She thought of Sarah, who had fought beside her, and she thought of Edward, sitting alone in a cell, stripped of everything he once used to control her. For the first time, the word free didn't sound like a fantasy. It sounded like a fact. The next morning, the newspapers printed the headline in bold letters. "Millionaire Edward Kane, sentenced to 30 years in prison." The photo below it showed Isabella walking out of court, her hand resting gently on her stomach. In the hospital, Dr. Brooks met her with a warm smile. "Your baby's heartbeat is perfect," he said. "She's strong, just like her mother." Isabella smiled softly. "Her name is Hope." Dr. Brooks nodded approvingly. Fitting. After everything you've survived. As she left the hospital, the air felt different. The noise of the city seemed distant, replaced by the quiet hum of peace. She looked up at the blue sky, remembering the marble staircase, the fear, the pain. But those memories no longer held power. Justice had been served. Her baby had survived. Her family was beside her. And somewhere behind prison walls, Edward Kane faced the life he had created for himself. One without control, without power, without her. The fall that nearly killed Isabella had finally brought him to the bottom. 1 year had passed since the sentencing. Los Angeles had moved on, but the name Isabella Carter still lingered in headlines, not as a victim anymore, but as a symbol of survival. The city had watched her fall, rise, and rebuild. Now, on a quiet spring morning, she stood in front of a glass building with her name engraved on the entrance. The sign read Hope Foundation. The letters shimmered under the morning light. The foundation provided housing, counseling, and legal aid for women who had survived domestic abuse. It was funded by the Carter Family Trust and the newly reclaimed assets from Kane Capital, now renamed Carter Holdings. Inside, a group of journalists waited to cover the official opening. Isabella stepped to the podium, her long hair pulled back, her pale blue dress flowing softly in the breeze. In her arms, she held her daughter, a small girl with bright eyes and tiny fingers clutching her mother's necklace. She smiled at the crowd. "When I stood in a hospital room last year, I thought my life was over. I thought pain had won. But pain is only permanent when we stop fighting. My daughter and I are living proof that love can survive even after the worst darkness." Applause filled the air. Cameras flashed, but this time, the light didn't feel harsh. It felt warm. After the ceremony, David Carter joined her at the steps. He had been her shield through every battle. Now he simply looked proud. "Dad would be proud of you," he said quietly. Isabella nodded. "He already gave me everything I needed. I just had to remember how to use it." They stood together for a moment, watching the banner of the foundation flutter in the breeze. Then David's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "The prison called," he said. Edward filed for an appeal. "It's already been denied." Isabella didn't flinch. "He'll spend his time blaming everyone but himself. Let him." David exhaled slowly. "You really have changed." "I had to," she said softly. "Otherwise he'd still own me, even from a cell." Later that afternoon, Isabella visited Los Angeles Memorial Hospital. The same hallways where she once clung to life now echoed with laughter. The nurses hugged her. Dr. Brooks greeted her warmly. "I never get tired of seeing happy endings," he said. She smiled. "You helped me find mine." In the pediatric wing, she handed a donation envelope to the hospital director. "This will cover the treatment costs for women who come in hurt and afraid. No one should ever have to choose between safety and survival." The director thanked her, but Isabella barely heard the words. She was looking at the same corridor she had been wheeled through a year ago, pale and broken. The smell of antiseptic brought the memory back for just a second, then faded. She had reclaimed even that. That evening, as the city lights began to glow, Isabella drove to Beverly Hills. The mansion still stood where it always had, towering and silent. It was no longer hers or Edward's. The bank had repossessed it after his conviction. It would soon be demolished to make way for new construction. The gates were unlocked. She walked inside slowly. Dust covered the floors, and the air smelled faintly of marble and emptiness. She stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, the place where everything had changed. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the polished stone. The steps were cracked now, faint scars running along the marble where her blood once stained it. She could still hear echoes of that night, the shout, the fall, the sound of her body hitting the floor. But the fear that used to accompany those memories was gone. In her hand, she carried a small bouquet of pale sky-blue flowers. She walked up the staircase carefully, counting each step until she reached the fifth one. That was where she had stopped breathing for a moment, where she had thought she was dying. She knelt down and placed the bouquet there. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me." The silence in the house was complete, but it no longer felt haunting. It felt peaceful. She stood again, looking around the grand empty hall. "Goodbye," she said softly. Then she turned and walked out, the faint scent of the flowers trailing behind her. Outside, The evening air was cool and gentle. The sun had almost set, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. Isabella stood by her car for a moment, watching the light fade. Then a small cry came from the back seat. She opened the door. Her daughter, Hope, looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. Isabella smiled. "You're awake, my brave girl." She lifted her daughter into her arms. The little girl laughed, reaching for her mother's face. "You know, this is where it all ended once," Isabella said softly, rocking her child gently. "But for us, it's where it all began." She strapped Hope back into her seat and started the car. As they drove away, the mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. Back in the city, the skyline shimmered like a promise. Isabella drove past the courthouse, past the hospital, past every place where she had once cried. Each building was now just a part of her story, not her prison. When she reached home, David was waiting on the porch. He smiled as she pulled in. "You went there, didn't you?" "Yes," she said. "I needed to see it one last time." He studied her face. "And?" "It's just a house," she replied. "The real home is here." He nodded, understanding. "Dinner's ready. Mom's inside." Isabella smiled, carrying Hope in her arms. Margaret Carter was in the kitchen, arranging flowers on the table, blue ones, the same as those on the staircase. When she saw her daughter, she opened her arms. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am," Isabella replied. They sat together, sharing quiet conversation as the evening deepened. Hope laughed from her high chair, her tiny hands clapping with excitement. David poured wine for their mother, smiling at the sound. For the first time in a long time, the Carter family was whole again. As the night ended, Isabella stepped outside one last time. The stars shimmered above the city, clear and endless. She held Hope close, whispering softly, "Your name means more than light, my love. It means life. It means we survived." A soft breeze moved through the garden, rustling the petals of the blue flowers nearby. Isabella smiled, her heart steady, her mind finally quiet. The marble staircase was gone, but the lesson it gave her would stay forever. Pain had once broken her, truth had rebuilt her, and love had carried her the rest of the way. The dawn of the survivor had finally arrived.